I'm not used to doing this, as you can see. You guys can't see what's going on, so just sharing the screen. Okay, what we're going to look at tonight in this section, in this shiur on great debates, is really this question of the nature of Zionism, and really the machloket, not necessarily on Zionism only, but the machloket between Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik on the nature of Zionism. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at it a little bit via another debate which raged in the time of Zionism, which is the debate over Uganda. So Shmuel, I'll pass you the sheet. Hi Simon, nice of you to join us. We're balancing two screens just so everyone can see it. Maybe we should turn this around and everyone can see you or something. But okay, fine. Yeah, you guys aren't seeing the feast we're having in here as a celebration. But anyway, so we're going to look at this at this principled machloket about Zionism and about the movement of the return to Eretz Yisrael in our generations, and look at it through the prism of Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, which is an argument which is worth considering, but we're going to look at it through the prism of this question of Uganda, right? As many people know, the kind of impetus for Zionism didn't actually start with Herzl. It started with the Jews who returned to Eretz Yisrael as part of Chovevei Zion, as part of Bilu in the late 20th century, late 19th century, 1880s, and Herzl, and they were largely from Eastern Europe, Eastern European countries, driven by ideology, driven to settle the land of Eretz Yisrael, driven also mainly by poverty and other things. And they were largely from Eastern Europe. Herzl comes along in the 1890s and sees almost completely assimilated Jew, sees the Dreyfus trial, which completely changes his perspective. And the reason why Dreyfus trial completely changes Herzl's perspective is because France is essentially the bastion of liberty, right? The French Revolution was the harbinger for a lot of like the national movements and moves for freedom and democracy throughout much of the Western world. And so if in that place, an assimilated Jew called Alfred Dreyfus, who was a decorated captain, if he is able to be essentially tried unjustly for being a Jew, that raises a lot of questions. And for Herzl, that raised immense questions, and the only solution he saw to it was a solution of a Jewish state, right? And we can paint Herzl however we want, and there's a lot of revisionism about what Herzl stood for, but largely Herzl believed in the need for a state to solve the issues of anti-Semitism, and for the Eastern European Jews to solve the issues of poverty, which they engaged in, and that also explains a lot about how he went about it. And in the background to this, right, you already have the movement of Jews through the land of Israel, the Bilu and the Chovevei Zion and other organizations that are coming before Zionism, mainly from Eastern Europe, right? And so when Zionism comes, it's actually a merging of these kind of worldviews, and you have a number of interesting debates, right? Actually, talking of France and anti-Semitism, I just wrote a letter this week to the French consulate in Manchester about Sarah Halimi was killed, and they weren't able to prosecute the attacker. I urge you all to do the same, right? The address is online. I wrote to him. Whatever we can do, I guess, is I wrote in the letter that if France is to be true to its principles of liberty, fraternity, equality, and fraternity, this kind of thing can't happen. And what's worse is that it took them a long time to even call it anti-Semitism. Even now, it's not so clear. It's anyway. It's the nature of the modern world, unfortunately. Hello, Peretz. Sorry, Peretz has joined everyone. Anyway, once again, just for the people who joined a bit late, it's very nice to be in the Beit Midrash to see people, even though we come here to shul, or, shul doesn't, but I'm saying just to be in like a normal setting is a machaya. So hopefully by the rest of you soon. Okay, so what we've got in the sheets and on the screen is this question of Uganda, right? It has this kind of description. There's a picture here of Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Reines, who was the founder of the Mizrahi movement, right? right? The movement which I work for, and still a very important player in Israel today. And it's talking about this offer of Uganda, right? An uproar filled the large hall in the Swiss city of Basel. The shouting of the delegates participating in the Sixth Zionist Congress in 1903, accompanied by a variety of dramatic gesticulations, was overwhelming. The conference later came to be known as the Uganda Conference. It is difficult to overstate the drama that took place, right? At the historic event, to which a significant rift emerged in the young Zionist movement. Theodor Herzl's proposal to create a temporary shelter for Jews in Africa was accepted. However, following that vote, a group of Russian Zionist delegates left in the hall and shut themselves in another room where they proceeded to mourn the destruction of Jerusalem. Right, according to one of the descriptions, when Herzl asked to come into the room and speak to them, they refused, with one even calling him a traitor. Herzl entered the Congress with a promise that the Uganda proposal was only a temporary solution and swore, if I forget thee, Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning. Right, so in 1903, 6 years after the first Zionist Congress, Herzl is offered by the British and others a part of Africa. I believe it's actually part of what is say Kenya, not Uganda. And that essentially means they're getting what they wanted. You're able to set up a state. But what it turns out to be is that the Russian delegates, the ones who, what was Herzl's reason for wanting a state at that point? All the Russian pogroms that were going on and all the poverty of the Russian Jews, right? Forget about anything else, right? That they could have had a state then. We could have had a state then, and we all know history. And things may have turned out differently. And for Herzl, he had it in his hands, right? They're actually going to give it to us without waiting, without all these things that's happened within 6 years. And so that's why he wanted to take it. But the Russian Jews, the ones who this state was seemingly for at that point, were the ones that said no. But you see this clash of East and West, right? The East very much more tied to tradition, very much more tied to the idea of Eretz Israel. Right, they understand Zionism to be tied to the land of Israel intrinsically, right, and they don't see it as just this political maneuver, right. However, interestingly, right, just the next paragraph, the Uganda proposal received many votes in the Congress, thanks to the support of one of its major factions, the Mizrahi movement, the religious Zionists. Rav Yitzhak Ryan is the leader of the movement and one of the founders. Right, was an associate of Herzl and firmly supported his plan, right? And they wonder about this. Well, you can read more on the inside. We don't have so much time. And he says here, we agreed to the African proposal because we took heed of the needs of our people, whom we love more than the land, right? Again, a very pragmatic political concern from the Mizrahi. And if you were to say that today to many people who know what the Mizrahi is, they would say you're crazy. How could the Mizrahi have voted like that? The group of Zionists that were the most committed to Eretz Yisrael, the group of Zionists that were the most religious and understood the significance of Eretz Yisrael maybe more than others, how could it be that the Mizrahi voted in favor of the plan for Uganda, right? It's quite surprising. But we're going to see now, though, that even this debate continued even in the writings, I believe, of Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, to a large degree, about what is the nature of Zionism per se, or what's the nature of Eretz Yisrael in many regards, right? And again, I don't think Rav Soloveitchik or Rav Kook disagreed. I think they just highlight different things because that's part of their worldview. And it should be noted there are two reasons why the Mizrahi likely supported the Uganda plan. The one reason has to do with the poverty of the Jews and the Kishinev pogroms and everything else. But the other reason has to do with the fact that it actually solved a lot of theological issues, right? Because what were the claims made by the anti-Zionists against the Mizrahi or against Zionism bichlal, apart from the fact that the Zionist movement was largely not frum? What do they say? What? The Shvuot, the 3 Shvuot, or all the reason not to go up to Eretz Yisrael and not to push Mashiach, etc. So actually, Uganda, in that sense, also solved the problem for the Mizrahi, right? And so that was part of the reason as well that they voted. Okay, but now let's go on to the next page to see now the kind of what I call the machloket between Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Kook about the nature of Zionism. obviously Rav Kook lived before Rav Soloveitchik's time. He passed away in 1935. Rav Soloveitchik passed away in the 90s, I think. But Rav Soloveitchik did meet Rav Kook once, right, in Israel. He did come once to meet him, and anyway, so they come from different places in many respects, different worldviews. But let's read what Rav Kook writes about Eretz Yisrael, and this is important. This is very important. This is the beginning of his book Orot, the famous book. So let's just read. This is the beginning. Eretz Yisrael einena davar chitzoni. The land of Israel is not an external thing. Kinyan chitzoni l'uma, an external national acquisition. רק בתור אמצעי למטרה של התאגדות הכללית והחזקת קיומה החומרי או אפילו הרוחני. It's not a means to the goal of a general unity and strengthening of the physical or even the spiritual, right? It says the land of Israel is an intrinsic section of the nation. ארץ ישראל היא חטיבה עצמותית קשורה בקשר חיים עם האומה, right? Attached to it with a living bond. חבוקה בסגולות פנימיות עם מציאותה, right? Entwined within its existence in internal uniqueness, right? Rav Kook obviously using very poetic language. Have you done this before, Daniel?
I've got the Orot in English translation.
Oh, okay, fine. Have you guys learned this before? Read through at least once. Very good. So, but what's Rav Kook talking about the land of Israel? And hidden in his words is a kind of dealing with some of the claims of political Zionism, I would say, right? Obviously much deeper than that. And what Rav Kook is writing about comes from ideas found in Kabbalah and Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah Shebichtav, Nigle, and Nistar, of which he was holding in all of it, right? But the idea here is Eretz Yisrael is not something external. It's not a thing which helps us achieve something. It's not something which is something we can grasp and will help us. I mean, it might do that, right? It might help us achieve a spiritual height. It might even help us achieve a physical protection, right? That's what Zionists said. We need a country to defend ourselves, to raise ourselves culturally and spiritually, right? And even Rav Kook himself says some of those things, right? But that's what Zionism is to return to us what's been lost in the Galut. But what we see here is that it's much more intrinsic than that, right? Or you would say immanental than that, if that makes sense, right? The land of Israel is an intrinsic section of the nation attached to it with a living bond, meaning it is part and parcel of Am Yisrael together. It's not something that we use to help us. Rather, it is part of us, right? It's a limb of our body, and we're a limb of it, so to speak. And Rav Kook obviously is also influenced by Hegel and other writings, but also obviously by these deep Kabbalistic notions, and we're attached to it with a living bond. So when you say to someone like Rav Kook, well, forget about Eretz Yisrael for now, or not forget about it. Let's not. We'll worry about Eretz Yisrael later. For the time being, let's solve our physical needs. Let's go to Uganda. He might say, okay, but you see, his connection to Eretz Yisrael is this deeper connection that I think many people even today find difficult to comprehend. Right? Many people today are still kind of in the conception of Eretz Yisrael is somewhere where I can be from. Eretz Yisrael is somewhere where we can be defended. Eretz Yisrael is somewhere that has nice houses. Well, all those things are important. Rav Kook would also say they're important, but he says it's much deeper than that, right? Our connection is something which is as though we're part and parcel of the same thing. Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and Torah, essentially part of the same kind of intertwined existence, he says. And then he says, right? He says, if Sharlamod ala tochen, right? It is therefore impossible to explain the uniqueness shel skulat kedushat Eretz Yisrael, to explain the uniqueness of the sanctity of the land of Israel, uloti lafoal et omek chibata, to actualize the depths of love for her. B'shum haskala rationalit, right? In any humanly rational way, ki im baruch Hashem asher al ha'uma bichlala. It is only through the Ruach Hashem, right, that is a part of, or upon the nation as a whole, right? Through the natural spiritual nature which exists in the soul of Israel, which spreads out through it, right? Meaning that our love and our connection cannot be explained because it is so deep and so essential and so intrinsic to who we are that it can't be explained, right? It can't be explained. And so let's just read number 3 here. Contemplating the land of Israel as an external value which serves only the purpose of uniting the nation, right? Even for the sake of enabling the Jewish idea in exile, guarding its form, strengthening faith and reverence, and strengthening practical mitzvot in their proper form, does not produce durable fruit. This foundation is rotten compared to the sacred strength of the land of Israel. It's not that it's rotten, right? It's rotten compared to what Eretz Israel is, which is this living, breathing organism that is part and parcel of us, right? True strengthening of the Jewish idea in exile will only come by a deep embedding in the land of Israel. By yearning for the land of Israel, the Jewish idea will continually receive all of its independent traits, right? Only by strengthening this love of Eretz Israel, this connection to Eretz Israel, will we be able to strengthen this, the Jewish ideal and the Jewish idea in exile. Meaning that for Rav Kook, who's Havdil, but is parallel to the Russian Zionists, right? This idea of rejecting Eretz Yisrael in favor of Uganda, even temporarily, was akin to, not even rejecting Chas v'Shalom one of your children, right? It was akin to chopping off your arm, like literally chopping off your arm, because essentially in this worldview, it is all part and parcel of the same organism, So that's Rav Kook. We'll leave him by the by, just for now. You want to say something, Shmuel?
Yeah, just the Russian Zionists who were opposed to the Uganda plan were not themselves religious. So what was the reason for their opposition?
So I think they were religious. I think they were very much more traditional than the Western Zionists and the kind of more assimilated. They were much more traditional, and they definitely grown up in surroundings that were much more traditional, much more embedded in Jewish tradition and Jewish culture. And when they came, I think even traditionalists in that worldview would have thought it's like, how could you even do? And I think that is, I don't know if that's true today, right? Even traditional Jews, maybe it is. But it's like, even traditional Jews, people that don't keep Shabbos, right? But then you tell them, there are people who think in the world that Moshe didn't get the Torah from Hashem. They'll think you're an apikoros, right? How can people say that? So that kind of thing, that's kind of this natural instinct of what is right, because of their education and their upbringing, especially in Eastern Europe, right? And for them, when Herzl came and spoke to them about Zionism, or when people spoke about Zionism, they understood it as, we're going for Zionism, we're going for Yerushalayim. If it's not for that, it's not worth it. If not for that, it's not worth it. And the question really is, even today in Israel, not today, would it have been different had we gone for Uganda, right? The Shoah maybe would have been different, but would we have less wars? Would it have succeeded? And who knows if it would have succeeded? Maybe you might say, yeah, it would have worked. It would have been easier. Back then, who knew about anything? And okay, people would have come, or they wouldn't have come. But on the other hand, you might say, again, not from a Rav Kook perspective, right? Rav Kook would, I don't know if he would say this, but you might say, well, who would have come to Uganda? Like. Exactly. Like, why would you go? Already people go to America over Eretz Yisrael, right? But at least Eretz Yisrael comes with this spiritual package of it's Eretz Yisrael, right? And let's say, and it's not hard to imagine that the Ugandans or whoever was near Uganda would also be upset that we were in Uganda and not in Poland or America, whatever it is. right? So what would have happened when there would have been a war? What would we have been fighting for in Uganda, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's true as well today. I mean, I heard there's someone called Gershon Akoin, he was a general in the army. Not from like traditionally Frumish, but definitely more right wing in Israeli politics. He writes a lot. Unlike most generals in the army have but I feel it's like weird trying to talk, and the way I'm talking is very odd because it's not how we're talking over here. But anyway, yeah, it's me. But I think in the Israeli army, generals get like quite a high education, right? And so many generals learn like logistics, or learn business, or learn intelligence, or politics. So he did his degrees in humanities, and he writes. He's like a philosophy. He's quite a philosophy guy, and so he writes about that as well, which is about the right wing and left wing divide in Israel. People say, just forget about the Shtachim. We need peace. Let's come off the mountain. Let's leave the West Bank, and there'll be peace with the Arabs. So he says actually what that does is, again, I'm not arguing one with the other. Obviously, I live in the West Bank, so you probably know what I think. But he says, if we were to do that, that would completely weaken our foundation spiritually. Meaning, Zionism is built on the idea that Jerusalem is holy. It's built on the idea that where the Am Yisrael live, which is in Yehuda v'Shomron, etc., and it would weaken the kind of spiritual foundation of the people as a whole, and would lead to a situation of people saying, why defend Tel Aviv, right? And that's his claim, and it's kind of the same thing that I said here. Yeah, but yeah, so people say that argument as well. He's not the only one to say it, but the way he phrased it was not only like, if you know that, then why not that? It means that, yeah, but at a deeper level, people would no longer have anything to hold on to, right? And that's an important consideration, right? You see in the world today, the notion of postmodernism has led to the fact that people actually don't have shared values anymore, right? In many, and you see the broch that happens in most of the world, including Israel, and it's an argument which bears considering. Okay, let's we're running out of time, but we'll keep going Birshutchem, and then I'll talk about aliyah afterwards. So Rav Soloveitchik, as we know, he comes from Brisk. We've done a few shiurim on Rav Soloveitchik, and we learned last year Isha Emunah, right, lonely man of faith. Rav Soloveitchik comes from Beit Brisk, huge Talmid Chacham, and he says like this. This is part of, he writes this book called Dodi Dofek, which we also learned in part last year about, why be Zionist, right? And he was someone who came from anti-Zionism. The Brisker dynasties in general opposed to Zionism, and he changed Zionism and became president of the Mizrahi in America, and he gave a lot of talks for the Mizrahi in America. And the reason is this book in Kol Dodi Dofek, My Beloved Knox. And what he talks about in the book, just for those who weren't in the previous Shiurim, is the notion that the beloved in Shir Shirim is Hashem, and he knocks on the 10th door 6 times. Oh, he knocks on the door, not necessarily 6 times in Shir Shirim. Rav Soloveitchik says these are 6 knocks, and it's a tragic scene in Shir Shirim, where the beloved is like in bed and she's just got undressed, and she has to get up, and she's like, I hear you knock in, but I'm like half asleep. I don't want to get my feet dirty. I don't want to come. And then eventually she decides, okay, she's going to get up and she's going to go and open the door. And she opens the door, and the beloved has fled, right? So it's an allegory for Hashem calling to Am Yisrael. And Rav Soloveitchik says that the beloved is Hashem, and he's knocking 6 times on our door, and he wants us to get up and not miss the moment. He's speaking specifically to the Orthodox, right? But it gives us a sense about how he understands Zionism. So we'll just read it quickly. One of the knocks, he says, 8 years ago, in the midst of the night of the terrors of Majdanek, in a night of gas chambers, crematoria, in a night of total divine concealment, right? That's how I understood the Shoah, right? That Hashem concealed himself. In a night ruled by the devil of doubt and destruction, who sought to sweep the lover from her tent into the Catholic Church, in a night of continuous search for the beloved, on that very night, the beloved appeared. The Almighty, who was hiding in his splendid sanctum, suddenly appeared and began to beckon at the tent of the lover. who tossed and turned on her bed by convulsions. How many times did the beloved knock on the door? It appears that we can count at least 6 knocks. First, the knock of the beloved was heard in the political arena. From the point of view of international relations, no one will deny that the birth of the state of Israel in a political sense was an almost supernatural occurrence. Both America and Russia voted for the state of Israel, right? Something that was unheard of, right? And that is Hashem speaking to us through history. You can't deny the miracle of what is going on. Second, I'm skipping now. The knock of the beloved was heard on the battlefield. The tiny defense forces of Israel defeated mighty Arab armies. The miracle of the many living lands of the few materialized for our eyes. Had the Arabs not declared war on Israel and instead supported the partition land, the state of Israel would have remained without Yerushalayim, without a portion of the Galil. Again, Hashem is calling to us through history, through the miraculous. Third, the beloved also began to knock on the door of the tent of theology. And possibly this is the strongest beckoning, right? And he says, I have on several occasions emphasized in my remarks concerning the land of Israel, the theological arguments of the Christian theologians, the effect of the Holy One is taken away from the community of Israel's rights to the land of Israel and all the biblical promises. And Jerusalem now refers to in an allegorical sense to Christianity, which is one of the Christian claims, which has since been overturned because of the state of Israel, right? Is that Hashem still loves Am Yisrael and wants them to have Eretz Yisrael. Now, he's not claiming that there was ever doubt. He just wants to say that now they even recognize that, right? And something as part of the miracle of the state of Israel, this military miracle, the political miracle, and the theological miracle. The thing about a religion of 1 billion people changed the tenor of their faith because of the existence, essentially, of the state of Israel, right? So, regardless of all the claims of Zionism, anti-Zionism, you have to recognize this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is calling to us. Fourth, the beloved knocks in the heart of the youth, which is assimilated and perplexed, right? What Israel meant for people in the 1960s and 70s, and even today in America, and even in England, and especially in England as well, and in Australia, right? It gives them a sense of Jewish peoplehood, and that in of itself is a massive miracle. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending us a message, right? The very mention of the name of Israel is reminders of the fleeing Jew that you cannot escape from the community of Israel, right? Israel itself reminds them that you cannot. The fifth knock of the beloved is perhaps the most important. For the first time in the annals of our people, divine providence has amazed our enemies with the astounding discovery that Jewish blood is not cheap. State of Israel, with its strength, you cannot just do to us what you've done to us for 2,000 years, and that in of itself is miraculous, a miraculous change. The sixth beckoning, of which we should also not lose sight, was heard at the time of the happening of the opening of the gates of Israel. The Jew escaping from an enemy's land knows that he can find refuge in the land of his forefathers. This is a new phenomenon in the annals of our history. We can all make aliyah. We can all, the law of return again. And I don't. Did anyone? Did you see the speech by the Ramatkal? You guys that I sent around, Yair Kochavi?
Yes.
So he says,
yes,
it's an amazing speech. He begins it by saying that in our times, we weren't witness only to an exodus from Egypt, we witnessed an exodus from all the 4 corners of the globe, all the countries of the earth. And it's true, if you consider the nature of what happened, it's miraculous. It's what the Nevi'im prophesies, right? And that too is one of the knocks. But what comes out from what Rav Soloveitchik's writing? What's his focus here? Right now, obviously, it's polemical. He's trying to convince people why Orthodoxy needs to play a part in the land of Israel. He's living after Rav Kook. Rav Kook passed away and didn't see the establishment of the state of Israel. And in many respects, or I personally think that many of the arguments against Zionism were proven wrong historically, right? And you can't deny them now. But what's he talking about? He's talking about Eretz Yisrael being, or Zionism and the return to Eretz Yisrael being utilitarian. All right, why is it good? Or what good comes out of it? Again, I don't think Rav Soloveitchik disagreed with Rav Kook in principle, but what good comes out of it? Let's just go through it again. Politically, people became united. We were miraculously defended on the battlefield. It serves as a place to prove the Christians wrong, what's going on, right? It helps the assimilated youth gather in unity around the land of Israel. Right,
I would call it as Kiddush Hashem in one word, really, or in one next term.
It is a Kiddush Hashem, but he's not talking about Eretz Yisrael like Rav Kook is talking about Eretz Yisrael. He's not talking about Zionism in the sense, and again, Rav Kook is talking about Eretz Yisrael, not exactly Zionism, but he's not talking about it in this like kind of utilitarian sense.
Yeah.
And Rav Kook also talks about Zionism in the utilitarian. He also says Zionism is good because it strengthens our culture and brings us together, etc. But his focus, I think, is on this notion of Eretz Yisrael as like intrinsically part of us, as intrinsically valuable, without reference to anything else. And that's his starting point in Orot, right? Whereas Rav Soloveitchik's starting point in Kol Lidi Dofek, again, our starting point is, he also, as Rav Kook knows about Eretz Yisrael, is no, it allows us protection, allows us to tell non-Jews, Jewish blood is not cheap, allows us to flee, to make aliyah, it allows us to strengthen the identity of assimilated Jews, right? And that difference is a crucial difference. And you see how it plays out already from the early days of Zionism, from the Zionist Congress that discussed Uganda, where even the Mizrahi took the more pragmatic approach. And I mentioned then that today I don't think people would think that the Mizrahi would ever think that, right? I mean, it's almost incomprehensible that the Mizrahi would ever take that stance, right? But that's also because the Mizrahi has been heavily influenced by Rav Kook since the 1960s and 1970s, right? The mainstream of religious Zionism in Israel is Rav Kook thought, right? That's what we learn and that's what we talk about. And that's like the kind of lingo in the yeshivot in Eretz Yisrael, right? Whereas the more, I guess you would call the more rationalist approach of Rav Reins, the more rationalist approach who comes out in the language of Rav Soloveitchik is secondary, right? Is obviously there, but is largely secondary and hasn't really won out, I guess you would say, at least in Israel hasn't won out. And it's an interesting thing to consider. Does anyone want to say anything or ask anything?
Where he compares the relationship of the Jewish people to the land of Israel with the relation of a husband and Kala.
Yeah.
And just to take that, Marshall, it's interesting to contrast that to Rav Kook's sort of much more absolutist language, where this is a complete unity that it's absolutely essential. You wouldn't quite say the same thing about a man and a woman coming together. It's more of it's a choice you make. Sometimes for part of their life they're not together. Now they're together. Sometimes they're apart. Sometimes they're together. But the choice of the marshal of a husband and color is sort of quite instructive in comparing to.
Yeah, I agree. I hear that. Also should be noted that Rav Soloveitchik wasn't really Western European. He spent time in Berlin, but his main thought comes from Brisk and comes from Misnagdisha theology, I guess you would say. And that's perhaps also Rav Kook learned in Volozhin, right? But I think that would be also part of the difference is their worldview is colored, one by mysticism, one by more rationalism. Like Rav Soloveitchik didn't talk in terms of Geulah now, or Ikva to the Mashiach wasn't part of how he spoke or how he considered things, right? He was much more rational. And again, in Israel today, you speak to many people, ideological religious Zionists, and they say it's pashut. What we're living through is Atchalta de Geulah, right? And if you want, you can read the article of my colleague Rabbi Koenigsberg. You can see in the Hamizrahi coming out. He wrote there that the 6-Day War was another step in the process of Geulah, and we still have work to do, but it's happening. I don't think Rav Soloveitchik ever wrote like that or ever spoke like that. Again, I don't want to belittle his connection to Eretz Yisrael, but it's a different approach to Zionism, one which we see even in the beginning of the Zionist movement and carries through till today in terms of how we perceive and how we relate to Eretz Yisrael, right? Is Eretz Yisrael just something which is good for us, right? It's weird to say that, right? Because you go to any aliyah speech or any Eretz Yisrael, it's good to live in Eretz Yisrael, right? But is that all it is? Is that all, right? And the truth is, Rav Kook is arguing, no, it's not all. It's much, much, much deeper than that. The notion of Eretz Yisrael being good actually pales in comparison to what Eretz Yisrael is all about. And that takes a lot of work, I think, to reach the level of Kook to really appreciate that. Paris, you want to say anything? You're showing on your screen, so I was like, you just managed to get the shirt on now, so you haven't had the schut of being in the base midrash yet, so you anyway. Okay, so on that note, we'll finish there. And I thought also I'd just share some thoughts about my own journey in Zionism, in aliyah, how I made aliyah, why I made aliyah, and so it's very, very interesting. If you would ask me, am I more of Kook or more of Soloveitchik? That's a good question when it comes to why I made aliyah, why I decided to make aliyah. I mean, if I would ask you, why would you consider aliyah? What would you say?
Better life is a Jewish life.
Jewish life, right?
Yeah. Anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism. So Peretz is saying things that are more Soloveitchik.
I don't see a contradiction between the two. From my point of view, they just complement each other.
Yeah, that's true. What were we saying?
But it's the practicalities of it's easy to live, great for the Jews to be together, out of poverty, whatever it is. But that's not what I'm saying. I think for most of it, it's quite a stable of it. We're still for that connection with Israel.
Yeah, that deep connection. Yeah.
Otherwise, you can move to New York.
Right. Yeah. Nachon, you can move to New York.
Yeah, I mean, just
can you guys hear on the screen what the people are saying? Oh, okay. We'll have to solve that next time. I have a little microphone. Yeah, they can't hear. So what Aaron was saying was that it's both basically. Everyone feels the connection to Israel, and there's also the practical side, right? That's basically what you're saying. Yeah. And Shmuel.
Why do that? Why go and live in Israel? You were in England. What are you doing here? And I think the problem is that the pragmatic arguments that just don't cut it because life is going to be hard in a Middle Eastern country in an economy that at times struggling, and I think you need the deeper reasons to make those sacrifices.
Right. So Shmuel said that you need the deeper reason to make sacrifices. His son's in the army, and a lot of Israelis are saying, basically, why did you come, right? And the pragmatic arguments kind of fall by the wayside in a Middle Eastern country where it's much more difficult. So I will just say, before I talk about my own kind of Zionist journey, and I'm going to present a third option, not a third option, but something, just another way of phrasing, I guess, what we're talking about. I just saw that Israel is now in the top 20 of GDP in the world, right? Ahead of UK, by the way.
Doesn't mean that it's fairly distributed.
Yeah, you're right. But that still says a lot about the nature of the economy and the country. And I also, when I work with students in Israel, a lot of people, they always talk about Eretz Israel as they always like to say, when we grew up, they just colored Israel with rose glasses, right? They didn't teach us criticism of Israel. They just said Eretz Israel, Eretz Israel. And we want to learn really what Israel is, right? So what I used to say to them is, Chevre, okay, you're right, there's something. But I was like, actually, if I were to ask you where you'd rather go on like a holiday, right? Or which place has the better health system? Yeah, I'm sure most of you would say Australia has a better health system. In your mind, even though you consider Eretz Israel well in terms of like religious and spirituality, most people consider Eretz Israel in the mindset of it's a nebuch place. Right? Actually, that's how you consider it. And I actually said to them, I think they're wrong in that consideration. Maybe 50 years ago, or 40 years, even 30 years ago, maybe you could have said that. But today, Israel is in a different place, and each country has their own inyanim. So it's true, people in England are much more polite. I always talk about this, and Israelis are much more direct. but sometimes being direct is helpful. It's also more friendly sometimes, right? And my mother works in special education in Australia, and when I was when I did my teaching degree, I was explaining to her how it works in Israel with special education and kids who have special needs, where there's a committee and each committee decides what each child needs, and their special schools, and it's not perfect because sometimes they need to get a taxi to the school and it's far away, and whatever. Sometimes there aren't enough resources. But my mother said in Australia, there's none of that. There's no government committee that decides how to help kids with special needs. They might get a little bit extra funding, a little bit of this, but there's no concept like that. And and so I said to people like that as an example, right? So there are many things in Israel that are better than what happens in other places. And I will just say, having lived here for a couple of years, I actually think the Israeli healthcare service is better than what happens here on certain things, right? So see also the vaccination. Right, and so each country is just different, and we need to change our mindset in terms of even the pragmatic utilitarian sense of what Israel is today, and that's important to know. Again, there are problems, not covering it over, but there are also very, very good things in Israel. Anyway, so in terms of my own approach to Zionism, I was given a very, very, very good Zionist education, right? In Australia. Australia is a very exceptionally Zionistic community, right? And to the point that I think I read something Dov Lippman wrote. You know, the Rabbi Lippman, he was the Chaver Knesset. He went to Australia about 5 years ago to talk at Yom Ha'atzmaut or something. He said he's never seen a community now that is more Zionist. Because when I grew up, it was even more Zionist. Now, even in America, there's a lot of criticism of Israel. There are a lot of different movements criticizing and this, but in Australia, even now, there's very little of that. And so I was really well brainwashed about Zionism, to the point that when it was my bar mitzvah, my parents said, "You want to do like a bar mitzvah party, or you want to go to Israel?" So I decided we should go to Israel, and I was actually disappointed when we went out of Ben Gurion Airport and there weren't orange trees growing near the airport. Like that, like I was 13 years old, and that was one thing I was upset about. I was like, I'd heard about the citrus trees growing next to the airport. Right? It was real Zionist brainwashing, Baruch Hashem. But that trip solidified, more than the brainwashing, solidified the kind of deep sense of connection to the people and the culture and the land, which I still feel today, right? I remember, again, in Israel today, I don't know if it would still happen, but when it was just after Rabin was killed, so it was 96 or something, right? You know how old I am, but anyway, so I remember we left the airport and my father went to find a taxi, and the taxi driver said, "Okay, I'm just talking to my friend," and he gave my father the keys to the taxi and said, like, "Go open up like the car, I'll be there in like 10 minutes or something," right? And just that for me was like, oh, actually, like what they've told me about Israel is true. There are no citrus trees outside the airport, but the taxi driver just gave us the keys to his car and said, "Go and open up the car," which is this very kind of Israeli approach. And I think for me as well, that was the driving thing. It wasn't only the ideology of Zionism, Eretz Israel, and everything else, and even the story, and not only the stories of heroism of Zionism, which was very powerful for me, but also just the sense of what Rav Kook is talking about, that it's really Eretz Israel, right? It's like actually ours. It's like a deep feeling. And I'll never forget when we were just married, my wife and I went to Australia for a visit, and we were schmoozing with some guy in the bakery, right, who worked with Aboriginal communities in Australia, right, Indigenous communities. And I don't know, we got talking. I don't know why we were talking to him. But anyway, it's good to talk with old Jews in the bakery. But so he said he took Aborigines, Indigenous Australians, to Israel on like a trip. And he said what was amazing is that when you explain to them what Israel means to you, you don't have to explain it. They get it, right? They get how Jews feel about the land of Israel, right? They get what it means to be like intrinsically, deeply tied to the land in a way that you can't explain. You can't explain. And I think I feel that very deeply. Together with that, I also think one of the reasons I made aliyah, and I always talk about this to students, is that like I actually like living in Israel, right? Like I actually enjoy the culture. I like Israeli Hebrew culture. I like the music. I like the restaurants. It's like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that, right? Like it's an important aspect of succeeding in Israel and really being Israeli and being in Israel, together with the ideology of I want to play my part in the Zionist narrative, in the Zionist story, and that can only really happen in Israel. And you know, I really still today think that Zionism and the story of the state of Israel is the most important thing that's happened to our people in hundreds of years. And I want to be a part of that central story, not on the sidelines for that story. And I think I'm also obligated to play a part in that story. And that essentially is my Zionist story. And I just wanted to end with kind of what I said before, but rephrasing Rav Kook slightly differently. Or when we talk about our connection to the land, so there's someone called Rav Shagar in Israel. He passed away. I learned in his yeshiva after he passed away. He's a bit off the beaten track, even in Mizrahi circles, but he writes about our connection to the land. And he says there are two, I think I mentioned this to Shmuel, but there are two ways of connection, right? There's connecting via like a paternal figure and connecting via like a motherly figure. And he says, and in the sense of Zionism, there's like the connection via like the avot, and even he says like Zionism in like a very ideological way. The land belongs to us, right? We're going to build a border of the land and we're going to control the land. It's a very kind of masculine way of talking about our connection to the land. He doesn't say that's a bad thing, but he says the other way of connecting to the land is via seeing it as Mother Earth, so to speak, right? That we're like intrinsically bound to the land, like a baby is intrinsically bound to its mother, is part and parcel of its mother, right? And that's another way of phrasing the same idea that Rav Kook is talking about, right? But in a way that I think speaks to me much more, right? That certain places in Israel I just feel intrinsically connected to, right? And it's not something that is ours because we can prove it and because it belonged to us and because, you know, all that's true, right? But it's something that is just, we're a part of it and it's a part of us, right? It's like this Mother Earth sense. You understand now maybe why he's a bit off the beaten track in Israel, but you understand he's talking about it in a different way, and that's something that very much speaks to me. And I think it was very interesting. I once was talking to a group of, I think, like non-religious students who came on a trip to meet the settlers, right? And so they asked me, why do you live here, right? And I think I was the only person that day who'd said to them what I just said here, which is, like, I don't live here because it's ours, right? Maybe also, but I live here because I just feel bound up to this place, right? And I think that also speaks to a much deeper place that maybe language and rationale can't really speak to. Do you want to say anything, Daniel?
Yeah, actually, I don't know about you, but I've heard from many people, and I myself, each time I feel like that. When I'm at the airport on my flight back to Europe, I always have the sadness of leaving the country. It's something you can't really explain to anyone. But I think we Jews, I think everyone gets an understanding of it. I think what Rav Soloveitchik was explaining it for was maybe for those who are a bit more detached, and even the Goyim maybe, and the Satmar. But I think most of us, whoever has been to Israel, automatically, I think, feels a connection. I'm very convinced. It's not something. It's something beyond. It's not something that you need to explain anyway.
Yes.
But Rav Soloveitchik is so important because it goes over logic and it put things. It rationalizes things that needs to be said and explained to those who don't have an emotional connection or who speak on a different level, simply.
Yeah.
So I think it's necessary to have both of them.
Mama, sure. Yeah, I agree. You guys can experience what's going on here. Can you hear him? Can you hear Shmuel?
No.
I know why you can't hear. Now, can you hear him now?
Can you hear me, Daniel?
Yes, now I can hear you.
So I first went to Israel when I was 16. I went with Happening Dror, which is a secular Jewish youth movement. And we were in Ashkelon, which is the twin town of the Jewish community in Israel. And I remember the feeling I had and the realization I had. I was walking around in Ashkelon and I thought, this is the first time in my life that I'm actually not a stranger in the country that I'm in. I actually belong here. And that to me, I mean, it's not exactly the deep thing that Rav Kook is talking about, but it's not pragmatic. It's just that it's not exactly pragmatic, but it's just the sense that, you know, nobody can turn to me and say, you know, what are you doing here, Jew? You know, get back to your own country. You know, this is my country. So that to me is what, you know, I see Israel as. And, you know, I think at that time I very much wanted to make aliyah. I still haven't done it yet, but I still have the same view of the country.
Beseder. So thank you to everyone for joining. It was a nice session of our first session back in the Beit Midrash. The Beit Midrash hopefully should also for us be like a little beacon of Eretz Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz, right? And the Shekhinah is within the Dalet Amot Shel Halacha. Tomorrow evening we're going to have Tzurva at 8:45 for those who are joining in the Beit Midrash and also on Zoom. And we're also going to have a Erev Lag B'Omer Shiur celebrating the return to in-person learning, looking at the Cave of Rashbi. I just want to say I wanted to title the Cave of Rashbi and the Cave of Plato, and my wife said no one's going to know what you're talking about. Since then, I've seen 5 ads for similar shiurim on Facebook. So anyway, but the Cave of Rashbi and looking at the place of the Beit Midrash in Jewish life and actually presenting a rather unique, I think, approach. One not the standard one that, you know, it's intrinsic. Right, there'll be much more depth to it, and look at the story of Rashbi in the cave and his withdrawal from society, and what that means for us as well in our own day and age. Please sign up if you want to. There'll be food and drink, and if not, then the Zoom is always available on this channel. Good to see everyone. Looking forward.
Thank you, Yari. Bye.